In part 5 of Confessions of a Collection Agency Lawyer, former collection agency lawyer Mark Silverthorn explains why Canadians might not have to pay a debt due to the passage of time and the expiry of a limitation period.
Is there anything you can do about turning down the heat? It's really hot in here.
No, we cannot turn down the heat. Do you think you're at a spa? Do creditors, collection agencies, and collection lawyers try to get consumers to pay accounts that they do not have to pay?
Every day in this country, hundreds of thousands of Canadians make payments on unpaid accounts that they do not have to make. The reason why they do not have to make these payments is the passage of time and the expiry of a limitation period.
Why can Canadians avoid paying a debt due to the passage of time?
Provincial governments have enacted laws known as Statute of Limitations, essentially the purpose of which is to force creditors to sue debtors within a certain period of time, after which the debtors acquire a good defense. So what the government is trying to do is have some certainty in the marketplace by forcing creditors to sue debtors within a certain period of time, whether it's somewhere between 2 and 6 years.
What type of debt can a Canadian avoid paying due to the passage of time?
Most Canadians don't know that it is possible to avoid paying certain types of debts due to the passage of time. Now, it's not all debts that a person can avoid. So let's canvass those debts which a person cannot avoid paying due to the passage of time. So this would include monies owing to the government. So if a person has a traffic ticket or income tax, or they owe GST, or there's student loans owing to the government, these are all debts that a person cannot take advantage of the passage of time to avoid paying. Similarly, if a person has outstanding child support or spousal support, these are not debts that a person can avoid paying due to the passage of time. The category of debts that a person can avoid due to the passage of time are what I would call unsecured consumer debt. And that's consumer debt is debt arising from a consumer transaction. So some examples would be a cell phone bill, if you've got a cable service, a telephone bill. It might, most credit cards, personal loans, lines of credit, things like that. These are all consumer debts.
How old does a debt have to be before a person can avoid paying it due to the passage of time?
The key factor is the province in which a person lives in. Each province and territory in Canada has a law, and it's referred to as a statute of limitations. It may have different names, but it's known as a statute of limitations. And in the majority of Canadians live in a jurisdiction where the statute of limitations is 2 years. In Quebec, the statute of limitations is 3 years, and in a few provinces, the statute of limitations is 6 years, and that would include Manitoba, the 3 territories, and a few of the maritime provinces.
When does the clock begin to run on a limitation period?
That's not an easy question to answer, but I think the best rule of thumb is that sometime in the 6-month period after a consumer's date of last payment on an account, that's when the clock on the statute of limitations begins to run. Now, if it's very helpful if you're trying to figure out or trying to understand the statute of limitations, it's very helpful to think of a limitation period as a clock. And it's important to know, when does the clock on the statute of limitations begin to run? When does it stop running? And is there anything that could restart the clock on the limitation period?
Is there any action that a consumer can take to restart the clock on a limitation period?
There are two things that a consumer can do to restart the clock on a limitation period. The first thing is to make a written acknowledgement of the debt to the creditor or the creditor's collection agent. And so it's important that this acknowledgement be in writing. So for example, if a collector at a collection agency were to call the consumer up, and if the consumer were to say, geez, I know I owe this debt, but I just don't have the money, that's an oral statement. It's not a written statement. So that oral statement does not restart the clock on a limitation period. However, if the consumer sent an email or a letter to the creditor or the collection agent indicating that they acknowledged owing the debt, then that written statement would restart the clock on the limitation period. The second thing that a consumer can do to restart the clock on a limitation period is to make a partial payment. So anytime a consumer makes a payment on an account, it will restart the clock on a limitation period. Now there's one exception, and this applies to both the written acknowledgement of the debt and a partial payment. If the limitation period on a debt has expired, then it is not possible to restart the clock on the limitation period.
Has the COVID-19 pandemic had any impact on limitation periods?
At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're pretty well talking about in 2020 calendar year, some but not all provinces passed laws that essentially paused the running of the clock on limitation periods in their province. And in order to know whether or not a limitation period was paused in a particular province, it'll be necessary to check. Well, if an individual wants to know exactly when a limitation period was paused in their province due to COVID-19, then I would recommend that they speak with a civil litigation lawyer who practices law in their province.
What is the impact of the expiry of a limitation period on a debt?
When a limitation period expires, an unpaid account does not go poof and magically disappear. The debt still exists. However, the expiry of a limitation period is important because what it does is it provides the consumer with a defense. And if the consumer were to be sued after the expiry of a limitation period, then the consumer can file a timely defense and plead the expiry of their province's statute of limitations as a full and complete defense, and under those circumstances, the consumer would be successful. Now, on the other hand, if a creditor were to sue a consumer after the expiry of a limitation period, and if the consumer were not to file a timely defense and plead the expiry of the province's limitation period, under those circumstances, the creditor would obtain a default judgment against the consumer. So, even if a limitation period has expired, a consumer must be on guard in the event that they were to be sued by a creditor. As a practical matter, creditors rarely sue consumers after the expiry of a limitation period.
We know that you used to be a collection agency lawyer. What do you do now?
I am the founder of a firm called Debt Coach Silverthorn. We have a website called debtcoachsilverthorn.ca. There are all kinds of articles that are helpful to consumers and YouTube videos. The mantra for our firm is empowering consumers struggling with debt. I also offer 30-minute telephone consultations, some one-on-one coaching for those who would like some one-on-one coaching.